Hi, I am Michael Santos with Prison Professors, and a couple of weeks ago we did a couple of interviews with Craig Rothfeld of Inside Outside, and if you look in the show notes below, you will see links to those interviews. He's an individual who served time in prison, but while he was in prison, he worked hard, he really studied to learn the system, and since getting out, he has launched a consulting career in New York where he advises people who are going into the New York State prison system. Well, during this era of COVID, any person who's in prison or going into prison faces real challenges. And so I wanted to bring some attention to our viewers at Prison Professors of an article that Craig co-authored with Seema Iyer, who is an attorney and a journalist. And they published this article today in Bloomberg Law. The article is titled Insight: Helping Inmates Cope During COVID-19. And just in case you can't read because you're listening or you're watching this video on a cell phone, I will read it for you, and I will provide a link to the actual article in the show notes below. So this was published on August the 18th at 1 o'clock in the morning, but I'm reading it today on August the 18th around noon California time. And so the caption tells us that COVID-19 has led to some minor changes in most prisons, like more hand sanitizer and minimal testing, but meaningful change to improve conditions is still far to come. Craig Rothfeld, a criminal justice advisor and advocate, and New York attorney Seema Iyer say inmates are relying on their lawyers, legal services, and social workers more than ever, and outline ways to help inmates cope during the pandemic. Now, as a start, let me just give a little commentary here for those who are new to the system. In the United States, we have actually at least 53 criminal justice systems. And it's important to understand that when we're talking about COVID. Who are those 53 criminal justice systems? Well, the federal system is one criminal justice system, and it has its own code of rules. Every single state, all 50 states, have their own criminal justice system, so that makes 51. Then the District of Columbia, D.C., has a criminal justice system, that makes 52. And finally, the military has its own criminal justice system, that makes 53. Now, in addition to all those systems, every municipality has their own policies and procedures. And because COVID, the pandemic, has really been spread across the nation's prisons, many people are operating differently. Earlier, we published videos about the Attorney General Barr's memorandum, which allows people in federal prison to file for transition to home confinement for them to serve the remainder of their sentence. But some of the states are different, and we may be learning about that here in Craig's article that he published at Bloomberg Law. So, for those incarcerated, there is an expectation of diminished rights and privileges. Now, in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, the most basic of concessions have dropped even further. Safety for an inmate is always a concern, but never more so than now. COVID-19 has led to some temporary changes, i.e. face masks, more hand sanitizers, readily available, minimal testing, mostly focused on those over 50, but it is not nearly enough. Major changes are needed immediately. Now, I just want to make a comment here on face masks. When I was in prison, and I concluded my sentence in 2013, but when I was in prison, it was against the rules to even wear a cap, like a beanie type of a cap. So surprising that now they give face masks in the time of the pandemic, but I guess that's necessary to protect people. I just know that in prison, the face masks that you're going to get, you may not be able to change them as often. You may not have access to as many as you want. They may not be of the right quality. But here, face masks are one of the changes that have happened because of COVID. In many prisons, the corrections officers aren't even wearing masks, yet inmates are mandated to wear masks. So that's an interesting data point. And of course, that is going to be institution specific. In other prisons, that may not be the case, depending upon where a person is. But even so, one thing we know for certain in prison is you can't really social distance. It's just impossible to get away and to comply with all of the CDC regulations. Let's continue with the article. It seems unlikely any improvement in prison conditions nor any permanency to the temporary measures taken will result from the crisis. Except for the for-profit prisons, prisons are funded by the federal or state government, and most, if not all, are financially despondent right now. Well, I mean, theoretically, even the for-profit prisons are funded by the federal or state government because they're in a contract with the government. but this means even less future funding to the prisons, so improvements aren't expected anytime soon, if ever. Okay, well, that generally seems to be true. People in prison generally people in prison generally do not have access to the same resources that people in society have. So changes in inmates' rights due to COVID-19. Currently, there are no changes. Again, that is somewhat specific. At least now, in the federal system, inmates have the right to apply for compassionate release to home confinement, and some judges will even allow them to leave behind the administrative remedy request and file compassionate release requests directly in court. And that's a right that they didn't have prior to this pandemic. The Attorney General signed some rules for federal prisoners, and this is specific to federal. Let's continue. So federal prisoners can apply in court. Doesn't mean they have a right to get out, but at least they have the right to be heard. So, in fact, lockdowns where inmates cannot leave their cells or cubes have become more frequent. Yards have been closed. Mess halls have been shuttered, leaving inmates to eat in their cells and cubes. Vocation courses have been canceled. Visits have also been suspended. Yes, this is very tough for people in prison. This is a very difficult time to be serving a sentence in prison. Inmates are relying on their lawyers, legal services, and social workers more than ever. Below are some ways to help inmates cope during the coronavirus pandemic. Okay, headline. If an inmate is ill, non-emergency solutions. It is important to understand the process for when inmates fall ill. In non-emergency cases, the inmate notifies the on-duty CO and fills out a sick call request. The sick call slip gets completed and dropped in a mailbox inside the inmate's dorm, which gets picked up once per day. After the request is submitted, the inmate is usually seen within 24 to 48 hours by the facility's nurse or nurse practitioner. Again, this is state institution specific and also organizational specific. Remember, 50 states, federal, DC, and military all have their own rules. It is highly unusual for a doctor to respond to a non-emergency sick call. More often, medication is not prescribed, and over-the-counter like Tylenol or Sudafed may be given instead. Inmates often must make repeated attempts to request medication before it is prescribed and then after it is prescribed, and it can take another 24 hours to receive. Okay, again, institution specific. In the federal system, the medication of choice is ibuprofen, at least it was when I was there, but they do give medication. Doctors do give medication. It's tough. The 24 to 48 hour rule is generally going to be dependent on the security level of the institution. Sometimes it can be much longer than 48 hours in federal prison, even to get an appointment. Emergency situations. In the case of an emergency situation, the inmate will be accompanied to the medical unit by one or more COs and will be seen by the nurse or nurse practitioner on call. Depending on the severity of the situation, the inmate will be treated at the facility's medical unit or be transported to the closest nearby hospital. If hospitalization is required, the inmate will travel to the hospital in handcuffs and leg shackles and remain in handcuffs or both while being treated. A criminal justice advisor, an advocate, a prison consultant can intervene to ensure the inmate receives proper medical care. And that's absolutely true. That one difference I will apply there for the federal system is if a federal person is in a minimum security camp, he will not have to go to the transport in handcuffs and leg shackles. He'll be able to travel freely because he's got minimum security custody. I don't know the situation in states. How to stay healthy. There are steps inmates can take to stay as healthy as possible. Frequent hand washing. Inmates should wash their hands in the sink and turn the water off with tissues or toilet paper so as not to risk or touch germ-infected faucets with their clean hands. Most dorms, which are cleaned by inmates, have disinfectants available, and inmates can spray down their cube area or cell to try and keep it sanitized. However, this is not possible in many jails or prisons, and even where it is possible, disinfectants are not available on a daily basis. Inmates should not touch anything that doesn't belong to them. Other inmates' possession are not to be touched as a general prison protocol. If adhered to, this cuts down on germ spreading for other inmates' possessions. Do not share food. Avoid getting a tattoo in prison. Shower daily or as often as permitted. In many maximum security prisons, daily showers are not permitted, but rather 3 showers per week. Inmates should do laundry and keep clothes clean to the best of their ability, even if that requires washing clothes in a sink and drying in their cell or cube, and have a fitness routine that can be adopted to lockdown circumstances. Yeah, it's really important to be thinking about lockdown circumstances. A couple of things I might add in there is to get as many books as possible and self-directed courses as possible, because just as it is important to stay healthy physically, it's also really important to stay mentally healthy and to build a strong mindset. During this COVID condition where most people are living locked down, you can really get sad if you don't have something to do. But if you've got something to work toward, if you can create meaning in your life, things can get a little bit better. At least that's what I found while I was inside. Of course, at Prison Professors, we've got an abundance of resources available that you might consider, and they're all designed for people in jail or a prison. During COVID, access to phone and computers. During the COVID-19 pandemic, one other thing I wanted to say about maximum security in the federal system. In higher security prisons in the federal system, a lot of times there's a shower right in the cell, particularly in maximum security or supermax security facilities, but also in segregated housing. So then you can shower daily. But on lockdown, even if you're in a minimum or a low, if you're locked down to your cubicle, you may only be able to shower 2 to 3 times a week, which is very difficult during these times. During COVID, access to phone and computers. During the COVID-19 pandemic, phone time has remained unchanged, and computer access is often reduced to the facilities under lockdown. This applies to both legal and non-legal access. Yes, all resources are really severely restricted right now. New York State and other facilities have adopted the following policies during the epidemic. Phone calls. Each incarcerated individual receives 3 free calls per week, up to 15 minutes per call. Free calls are available beginning at 7 a.m. on Saturday and are associated with first 3 calls made during each week and do not carry forward from week to week. Phone hours vary by prison, but are typically from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Secure message stamps. Each incarcerated individual with access to general confinement, tablet, and kiosk will continue to receive 2 free stamps to use for secure messaging per week. In order to send an email, prisons charge a stamp. Prices range depending on how many are purchased, but can be as low as 24 cents per stamp. Stamps are added to your account on Friday afternoon and do not accumulate and replenish on a weekly basis based on use. Prepaid reply Wednesdays. Every secure message sent by a friend or family member on Wednesday will be accompanied with a free prepaid stamp that will allow the incarcerated individual to reply to the sender through Wednesday, August the 5th, 2020. Well, we're already past that now. The date has been extended with no end date now. It will be released when COVID abates. This column does not necessarily reflect the opinion of the Bureau of National Affairs or its owners. And then we've got some contact information for Craig Rothfeld. He's a criminal justice advisor and advocate at Inside Outside, the company he co-founded. He is a former broker-dealer executive who has served time in correctional facilities. He advises individuals, their families, and their legal defense teams on a pre- and post-criminal sentencing mitigation strategies to incarceration. Seema Iyer is a journalist and attorney. She previously served as a prosecutor in the Bronx, a criminal defense and civil rights attorney with her own law firm in New York, and a local and national news anchor. You can follow her on Twitter at Seema Iyer Esquire. Okay, so that's the article in Bloomberg today. I just thought it might be helpful for some of our audience who have family members or loved ones in prison. At Prison Professors, we try to provide as much content as we possibly can, not only about strategies to succeed through the journey, but also we want to bring awareness to resources such as this article that Craig Rothfeld offered with Seema Iyer. And again, there are links in the details below. If you haven't subscribed yet, we do hope that you will subscribe to Prison Professors. I am Michael Santos, and we've got sponsors at cbdtv.com that I hope that you will support. If you want books or resources for your loved one in prison, please visit prisonprofessors.com or see the notes below. Thank you.